Hello, everyone. Welcome to Reckless a Talk, a tabletop role-playing game interview show where we sit down with some of our favorite tabletop role-playing game creators, performers, and personalities. As always, I am your host, DM Nathan, and I am only a little bit losing my mind as I introduce this week's guest, Tom Bloom. I imagine most creators, if they thought long enough, could probably point to a handful of pieces of art that really spoke to them and shaped the projects they were working on. And Tom's work is deeply woven in the DNA of Rixia here on Reckless Attack. In the tabletop role-playing game space, he is best known for being one of the designers of the popular indie mech game Lancer, a far future game of corporations and giant robots and sick gear and feelings. He is also publicly playtesting his next game, Icon, which is a Final Fantasy-inspired fantasy game. There are links to both of these and other games in the show notes. But what I certainly know his work best from is his webcomic, Kill 6 Billion Demons. One of the best pieces of advice I have ever gotten from a fellow writer was to have a few pieces of work that you can fall back on, consume, and feel re-inspired by and energized by when you hit a slump or a bump. And Kill 6 Billion Demons is one of those pieces of work for me. It is dense, it has awe-inspiring visuals, it has demons, angels, identity exploration, anime fight scenes, friendship, big feelings, all that and more. It is one of the few pieces of media that I am happy to suggest to basically anyone and everyone, as I was grabbed after about page 5 when, spoiler alert, it happens. Anyway, getting to talk to Tom about his work in game design and on the comic was a real treat for me, and I hope it will be for all of you as well. We talk about the importance of vibes, world building with a point, internet fame, play testing, and so much more. Without any further ado, here is my interview with Tom Bloom. I hope you enjoy, and I will see you next Tuesday for Reckless Attack. Why, hello there, Tom.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Excellent. As we pretend that we haven't already been chatting a little bit before.
Yeah.
Welcome to the conversation for the first time. So excited to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So for those people who are not familiar with you, or at least not familiar with the full scope and breadth of all the things that you do in the tabletop role-playing game sphere and outside of it, could you please introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns, all the good things that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Tom Bloom. I actually changed my name recently. It was Tom Parkinson Morgan before, but I changed it because I recently had a kid in my family, and the one had the same name as my son. So it's Tom Bloom now. I picked that name. Very cool.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's a pain, but it's really fun to see people pick your last name.
I am very familiar with other people who have gotten married and changed their name that way, that it doesn't sound like a fun or good thing to do. No,
it's not. But it's kind of nice to like have the same name as the rest of your family, right? As your wife and son. So that's really
good
cool.
Thing emotionally, bad red tape wise.
Yeah, and it has a nice ring to it. It's like, oh yeah, sounds good. And so I do the comic Kill 6 Billion Demons. That's probably what I'm most known for. It's not actually my TTRPG work, but I draw this comic. It's a webcomic. You can find it online at kill6billiondemons.com. It's also in print with Image Comics. There are 4 editions now, and a 5th volume probably coming next year. I'm currently working on the 5th volume online. It's getting there. It's almost there. I also write tabletop role-playing games. I was the main mechanical writer the designer on Lancer, which is like a game about big mechs, which I'm sure we'll talk about a lot today. And I'm the writer and the designer on Icon, which is a game I'm currently working on that is in playtesting. I'm sure it will come out in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'm sure that it will come out, period, end of sentence.
Yeah, and I've also created some smaller games. I wrote a game for my comic that was powered by the apocalypse based called Broken Worlds. I wrote a game called Skull Wizards of the Chaos Caverns, which is basically a one-shot Mad Libs game, which is quite fun. And I wrote that one at 1 a.m. while very drunk at a bachelor party, which is cool.
At your bachelor party?
No. And I've written other games here and there that I've put onto my Patreon. Some of them aren't even like out there, but like I wrote a game about being wizards' apprentices. There's a game called Gun, which is Forge in the Dark, kind of like Western game. Although they aren't finished, and I'm not sure if I'll actually finish or publish them. At some point, I might do it. But I've been writing TTRPGs kind of in the background as a hobby for a long time. Only recently did I recently in the last like 5 years got serious about publishing them. So, and I have a little company called Massive Press, and we do primarily Lancer, but I think we'll be publishing other books in the future.
And just not to derail immediately, but is I can't remember, is Icon also a Massive Press?
Yeah, currently Icon is Massive. I'm debating whether I will actually end up publishing Icon with Massive or not, because it's a partnership, and my co-writer Miguel has had no involvement with Icon so far, and he currently works for Wizards of the Coast on the Magic Gathering team and is very, very busy, so I don't think he'll have much time to contribute, unfortunately, but we'll see.
Makes sense. So first of all, I don't want the interview to go on too long, and I'm sure I will talk about it during the preamble. Hello, future Nathan, recording the preamble. Kill 6 Billion Demons, your webcomic, is one of my favorite pieces of media. Period of all time.
That's high praise. Thank you.
We are in a homebrew D&D world for our kind of main non-interview portion of our podcast, and Kill 6 Billion Demons, kind of the world building of it, and the vibes and the themes and stuff were all really big influences. So I'm very excited to talk to you just generally, and also talk to you a little bit about the world building process. But I thought it'd be a nice way to set the stakes for any listeners who are like, would you like to get a little more info on Nathan's brain?
Oh, there you go.
Read Kill 6 Billion Demons. Where we usually start, and where a lot of these sorts of interviews usually start, is how you first kind of got exposed to tabletop role-playing games and or kind of sci-fi and fantasy. Or, I guess some people have just interpreted that as like introduced to nerddom. Where did that start for you?
Right. Good question. I guess with my parents, because my dad is a huge nerd. My mum's also a bit of a nerd, but she's not really like a very active nerd. She just does like sort of fantasy. It's kind of weird. Like you wouldn't strike her as someone who like reads a lot of fantasy novels, but her favorite book is actually Dune. And so we had a bunch of fantasy books lying around the house. And I remember reading Lord of the Rings when I was 10 or 11, I think. And that was really cool. And The Hobbit, and I read a bunch of other fantasy when I was younger. So I always read a lot of fantasy. Tabletop role-playing games in particular, I got into in middle school because these kids were playing D&D in like the quad, like after school and stuff. And we were like, hey, what's that? Can we play some? And like we got the books, and I don't think we were really playing D&D.
That's how a lot of these go, I think.
Yeah, but we were having a good time, with the game and with the idea of the game. And I actually met Miguel, my co-writer of Lancer, and a great friend of mine for like going on 16 years now, I think. No, longer than that. 18 years. Shit, no, 20 years.
Bigger.
Playing D&D at a lunch bench in 7th grade, which is kind of cool. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Was he part of that kind of initial like first intro, or was he like just a kind of like, and also he is doing this?
So actually, I played with my other friends first, but then a mutual friend brought him along. Was like, hey, can this kid play with us? And he did, and now we're friends like 20 years later, and wrote a role-playing game together. So there you go.
So what either kind of then or now has really like what struck you as like, this is what I would like to continue doing and what I'm really interested in? What itch did it scratch for you?
That's a good question. These are great questions, man. I love game design in particular. It really fascinates me, and I also like fantasy as a medium for storytelling, and I guess for like healthy escapism. I love improv. I'm a big theater kid, so that's always really appealed to me. Improvised storytelling has always been a big thing for me. I did a lot of improv, and I was in drama in high school and involved in theater in college and stuff. And those guys were always very D&D adjacent. There was definitely like a theater club D&D game going on all the time in college. I was for a while. I was actually one of the people who ran the Shakespeare club at UCLA for a bit.
Oh, cool.
Which by the way included people like Erika Ishii, who I think is like a big influencer in D&D.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It was really funny because I saw her in Geek and Sundry and stuff, and a long time ago when Critical Role was just starting out. And I was actually that's not to digress too much, but
all digressions.
I started watching Critical Role because Erica was like adjacent to like the whole like Geek and Sundry thing with Felicia Day. And
wow, really?
Like, yeah, and
like she's like interesting that was your in, so to speak.
Yeah, she's like, I'm on this weird stream, and I was like, cool, I should go check that out. Like, and I did, and I was like, oh, ended up getting super popular. I think I watched from episode like 2 of Critical Role. Back in the day, so that was kind of fun to watch. Kind of blew him out of control, get into this huge thing. But yeah, so always been around like nerdy stuff. Been very interested in game design specifically, and not just TTRPGs, but video games and board games, anything like that. It's always been a big hobby of mine. I would just kind of casually write games. I had a lot of downtime at my work. I used to work at a high school in Japan teaching English, and I would go to a special school on Wednesday. It was a special needs school. I only taught like one class a day there, meaning the rest of the day I'd just be at my desk. I didn't have a computer or anything, so I just would bring a notebook with me, and I would write role-playing games whatever in my free time. Yeah, or like board game ideas, or I just take notes or write stories for my comic and stuff. Actually, if you read the under text stuff in KSPD. So KSPD is a webcomic, right? It has this one. The listeners might not. Yeah. It has this like undercomic text stuff that sometimes tells a story or has like mythology in it or something in the comments section. And a lot of that stuff I actually wrote at my job in Japan while I was bored out of my skull. I had nothing else to do.
That makes sense, because you write a lot of seemingly super background lore and like text and like in-universe text, and it has always blown me away, that level of like detail and background. And it makes sense that it was written by someone bored out of their skull at a desk.
Yeah, well, more that I needed a creative outlet or something to do, right? So I would just write a lot. But anyway, it's always been a thing I've done to entertain myself. But the thing that I do is I work in a creative field, right? So I draw comics. That's my main deal. And if you work in a creative field, your hobby is also your job, right? Yeah. So that's amazing, but it's also it can be a bit tiresome, especially when you want to just relax and have non-committal creative output, right? So I would do stuff to avoid my job by doing something that was creative and work-ish, but not my job, right? So I would write for role-playing games. Like Monster originally was a project that I just wrote with a friend because we were like, hey, let's just write a game. It wasn't intended to go anywhere. And eventually what happens to me and to all the things I touch is my hobby becomes a job again. Yep. And then I have to find another hobby, another project to pursue.
Deeper and deeper.
Exactly. So it becomes a never-ending cycle, basically.
So I'm really interested in that kind of, first of all. So something that always struck me, and I think this is true of Lancer, of Icon, reading through the books and playtest materials, certainly of Kill 6 Billion Demons, is that the world is very, very flavorful and very deep, and always feels like there's always more. If you turned around a corner, there would be some crazy site with crazy lore and story, kind of very steeped in it, or at least enough flavor. Right. But it's interesting to me that you mention that you like the design part of games as well.
Yes.
And kind of the rules and granularity, because Lancer is obviously a very crunchy system and has a lot of cool modularity and that kind of stuff. So can you, I guess, speak a little bit about how the world building lore writing scratches your brain versus how the putting together cool systems and interactions and all of the cool stuff that come from that, how those differ, or how they might be the same for you?
World building is not like, I like it, but people always think to it's kind of interesting. People always think to have any creative work where there's like a world that you need to do an extensive amount of world building.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't really believe in world building very much. I think it's only useful as insofar as you understand what your goals are. So if you're writing a fantasy novel or a comic like I am, right? World building is cool as long as it is related to the sense of themes you're trying to explore with the work. And it's related to the characters. And it offers a sense of tone and a sense of verisimilitude and immersion. Like, I did a lot of world building stuff in the first volume of KSPD, for example, that I kind of regret because it was too much to dump on people. It's cool. Some people love it. But it was too much at once, and it was not particularly relevant to like the current situation. It was kind of just there for the sake of it. I think a lot of people, start trying to write a fantasy novel, and the first thing they go is like, well, how does magic work in my world? And it's like, who gives a shit? Who are the characters? What are they doing? What's their motivation? Maybe we can come up with something cool about the world that relates to the characters, and that will help us tease out a theme or something we can explore. But other than that, I don't think it's like particularly interesting. It has to have relevance, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're world building for a game, it's a little different, especially if you're running a game, because it can be useful to build that sense of immersion, right? A verisimilitude of this world being like a real place. That's fun to do, and it can really help your players feel immersed, right? Like this is a real area that you're living in and you're exploring, and there's people that live here. That's cool to do. However, I also find that people that write RPGs or write campaigns often prioritize world building to the detriment of like having the players actually tell an interesting story, right? They'll be like, oh, there was a cool dragon in this tower and the players never went to see them. I'm going to force them to go see this cool dragon, right? But the dragon doesn't matter at all unless the players show up and try to find the dragon themselves, right? It doesn't matter that in your world, like elves are cannibals who grow from trees if the players never meet any elves, right?
Yeah, right.
So it's fun to have those details there, but I think too many people spend too much time on that stuff without thinking about its relevance, its purpose in the story, and whether or not it actually connects to the protagonists of whatever you're trying to tell, whether that's your players or whether that's the protagonists of your fantasy novel or whatever you're working on.
Right, yeah.
So I don't actually think world building it's a useful exercise, but it's not the goal of any creative work. That's my view on it.
It sounds like I'm trying to find the right way to put it into a question. but I think that is very interesting in terms of looking at your work because all of your things are very thematic and capture a vibe. Basically, or a type of story or a genre or whatever. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
What is important is vibe, right? And genre. That is important because that sets the tone for how people engage with your work, right? Like that's actually what you care about. That's what a lot of people think when they think about world building, right? If I'm building a world, if I'm thinking about a world in which it is like stock medieval fantasy, whatever, that's a certain vibe, right? It can be done well, right? I love the cool, like 80s ass D&D vibe. You know what I'm talking about? Like the real, like corny, like old school, like Conan the Barbarian sword and sandals kind of thing. I love that. Like if you go look at some of the original covers for like AD&D and stuff, like I forgot if it's AD&D or a second edition. I think it's a second edition cover. It has like the big statue. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, with the jewel eye.
Yeah. That's a whole. Then a dude like dragging a lizard man in from the other room. Like that's the whole vibe right there.
Absolutely.
That's the whole thing, right? And there's entire games that have been written off of that vibe.
yeah, absolutely.
But that's the important part, not the actual details, right? Like if that makes sense to me. That's my general view on it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that offers great insight to both you and your process, and I think to other people's as well. Or
I hope so.
So when you're designing something, whether it is a story, whether it is a game, whether it's whatever, a fun thing you're doing to the side, do you start with that vibe, and how do you kind of like decide on what the vibe or theme is going to be as you're kind of approaching it, or is it just kind of whatever grabs you?
I think I do start with the vibe, and then you think about the system that you're going to use to convey that. That's like Lancer was definitely came off of like, we want to write a mech game, and I want this mech game to be modular because I really liked Armored Core. Icon was because I'm like, man, I really love that like Final Fantasy JRPG-esque like Studio Ghibli sort of weird like Japanese fantasy vibe that isn't really well represented in games over here, I think. So I was like, I love that thing and I want to bring it to games. That
kind of leads me into, I wanted to get a little bit more specific around Lancer in particular, because obviously that is one that is very popular. I think it's at least anecdotally one of the ones that I see kind of pop up some of the most. That's not kind of one of the like tried and true either, D&D / Pathfinder or, like Monsters of the Week thing, where it's its own system and thing that I see a lot of people play and talk about and get excited about. So it's
it's got a lot of word of mouth. Actually, it's really interesting. Like we never advertised for it. We haven't. It hasn't really. It's had a lot of actual plays, which is kind of cool. But there's been no like big. I guess Friends of the Table is running it recently, which is kind of cool. But
that's awesome.
Not a lot of big like podcast stuff that's taken it on. So it's kind of cool to see it has grown so much.
Yeah. So you mentioned it a little bit already, obviously, of just, we want to do a mech. I want to write a mech game and I want it to be modular.
Right.
And you had done some game design stuff already, as you kind of already said.
Right.
But at this point, you were already doing Kill 6 Billion Demons, and that was already doing, like garnering some success as I kind of understand the timeline. How did that project evolve, and specifically, when did it get to the point, if there was one, where you wanted to release it publicly and you wanted to be like, I want this to be a thing, and I want this thing to be a rule book that is, a number of pages long, and to have a Kickstarter and all these other things? How did that evolve?
Well, that's a great question and a long answer, unfortunately. So I'll try to be as brief as possible. But
it's to give space for long answers.
So my friend and I like to play. Miguel is his name. We like to play. He's my co-writer. We love playing RPGs together. He ran D&D 4e all through college and stuff, and I would run games at various points. And we met playing D&D, and so we played games together. And we wanted to look for a mech game, so we were in the car driving back from something one day, and I said, "Hey, look, I know we've been looking for a mech game, and there's BattleTech, there's proprietary stuff, but there isn't like a game out there that is flexible and kind of what we're looking for." So he's like, I found this other one, but it's not really that. I'm like, why don't we just write one? Because I just written the KSPD RPG, which was powered by the Apocalypse. Not a very good PBTA hack, by the way. But it was, I was dabbling into game design at the time. And so I was like, we could just write a game. And he's like, oh, okay. And he's a writer. He has an MFA in creative writing. I think he was studying one at the time. Actually, he was finishing it, intending to get into fiction. And right now he does the fiction stuff for MTG. Yeah, and so we just started writing together, and he was my roommate at the time, and he lived across the hall from me. Like literally, I could just walk out my door, open his door, and then be like, "Hey," and we would just pass stuff back and forth, write, and I would do mechanics, and I would write a whole section's game out that was kind of flavorless, right? And then he would like take that and then write all the story and background and flavor and stuff in. So if you go to Lancer, like you'll see a mech in Lancer has like has a little description of like, what is the mech? What does it do? What company makes it? And then like all the equipment also has little flavor text in it. Yeah. We love to like disperse our lore out like that, right? So it's like, it's kind of like if you were playing D&D and, your third level class ability, like your barbarian rage would have like flavor text in it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because it adds to the world a lot. So we did that, and it was very fun, and it was going really well, and we just passed back and forth. And at some point, we hit a point where we're like, well, this is technically a playable game. Let's just put it out on the internet and see if people will play it. Because I had an audience already. Mm-hmm. So we put it in the GDoc. It was just in the Google Drive for for a long time, and just publicly accessible as like a PDF. And that's just where we updated it. And eventually a community formed around the game on Discord, which is PilotNet, which is still going, has like 12,000 members. Wow. It's ridiculous. I don't even remember. It's a large server at this point.
It's big.
I'm going to look at it, actually.
Point.
big Discord community started to form around it, playing the game, and we got a lot of playtesting feedback. And then we both kind of realized, oh man, there's actually some serious interest in this game. And so as we got more feedback, it really encouraged us to write more. And eventually we just started taking it more seriously, and we're kind of drilled down on finishing the game. And it took us, I think a year and a half to really like get to a point where I felt good about it as a game. And Miguel was pretty happy with the fiction and stuff. And I just asked him, like, yo, do you want to just like run this on Kickstarter, see if we can raise money to print it? And he's like, yeah, sure. Originally, our plan was not to actually print the book, but just to pay for layout, art, and editing. But then we saw the response to it and how many people were interested in the Kickstarter, even though we hadn't really even mentioned it yet. Like,
even though there wasn't a Kickstarter.
No, we like breathed the word Kickstarter, and tons of people were like, "Oh my god, I have to do that." And so we were like, maybe this is going to be really popular. So we ended up deciding to print it. Which came with its own host of issues, but inevitably it was the right decision. We printed 10,000 books. We raised 10 times our original ask. We asked for, I think, 40,000 originally, and we made 435, and that enabled us to print and ship 10,000 books from China, which is crazy.
Yeah,
and we're still selling those actually, so we're almost through. But as of the time I'm speaking, I think there's like 500 of those left. So you're running out of time to get one. That's my little pitch there. But yeah, it was basically the community response to the game was so good that we felt like very encouraged to continue to work on it and to continue to take it more seriously as a project.
So I had a couple of kind of more process questions about Lancer, just because it's such an interesting one, and so indie, where it was just the two of you.
Yes. Right. Of course, I can't go without giving credit to all the artists we got, and also our
exactly
layout person, Minerva McJander, who's fucking awesome, and Melody Watson, who's our line editor, who's an Aussie, which has been fun for coordination.
Yes,
get business meetings together.
A very narrow window of time where you can have meetings, I would imagine, during the day. So first, I was just kind of interested, as you guys were going back and forth and creating this thing, whatever it was going to end up being, creating a thing. On your webcomic, it is you who are doing all the art, all the narrative design, all of the lore, all the everythings. Right. And so was that a different, or like, how was that a different process for you, and how did that work for you?
Well, like I said, basically, I used to just write. I would write something like, mimetic kill cannon, and like I would hand it off to Lopez, who would then actually explain what the hell that was, which was very funny. Yeah. Because occasionally I would just hand him some complete bullshit, basically as a prompt, and he would go fill that out. And we were just kind of on the same wavelength. I mean, if you talk about vibes, like both of us kind of like the same sort of science fiction. Mm-hmm. And so we were kind of in sync with that. Like, it didn't really have to be much of a conversation. Some things we had to talk about in terms of like setting tone for the game, but in general, I would just hand him things and let him go ham. It was very easy. Oh. Nice. Yeah. I certainly had certain visions about some aspects, such as the AI in Lance's setting, that were slightly conflicting with how he was sort of interpreting them. And so we had to kind of talk about them a little bit to straighten out one coherent vision for the company. But it was really very laissez-faire, which is kind of weird, right? Like, you would expect people to talk more, but we just literally handed things to each other, and then occasionally would talk about what we were writing. It was very very collaborative and improvisational to some degree. It was cool.
A lot of yes and, basically.
Yeah, a lot of that.
Thank you for handing me this, and we'll go with that. And you had it sounded like, and me, I'm sure it was developing too, but you guys had kind of that clear idea of like, here's vaguely what the vibe is.
Yes.
We'll refine, but because you had kind of agreed on what the vibe was going to be, at least at the outset, you could kind of just keep iterating on that with whatever you guys were coming up with.
We had a discussion right at the beginning about what we wanted the tone to be, and that was the important thing. Was like, this is the tone. It's going to be hopeful. It's not going to be something. It's going to be a setting where government is actually working for the benefit of people instead of, again, which is weird, and actually was very hard for a lot of people to to come to terms with, which was very strange. Like a lot of people,
players,
just people trying to play or read the game would be like, it's so interesting. As someone who makes stuff on the internet, people are very, very much slaves to genre in a way that they haven't been before because of the existence of all of media being at your fingertips, right? Like people just are constantly comparing all media to other media.
Yeah.
And so if something goes against genre, they bristle at it, not for any other reason than it's just not how things are, quote unquote, supposed to work, right? Mm-hmm. So in Lancer, we had a setting where the government union is this big intergalactic hegemon, and it's kind of complicated, but had a revolution that overthrew very like, the word I think is anthro-chauvinistic, like a human-centric, like fascistic regime, right? Kind of like Starship Troopers-esque, right? And overthrew that, and is now trying to do better and trying to actually, it's a big space empire, but it's one that is trying to be hands-off and basically offer a standard of living for everyone instead of trying to be like, a galactic hegemon. Yeah. And people bristled at the idea that a space empire could be well-intentioned but complicated, right? Yeah. Not even like, good guys, quote unquote, but some a polity that is like trying to do the right thing. I mean, despite the examples of fiction that like the Federation in Star Trek, or Ursula Le Guin's Ecumene and everything. Mm-hmm. Like there's a lot of examples in science fiction of that kind of thing, but because people are so clued into pop culture with Star Wars and all these like evil empire narratives, they kept trying to find some kind of trick or some kind of like out that would prove to genre, instead of just trying to accept that was not the case here, that was trying to do something different. It was very interesting.
I had some other, kind of like Lancery questions, but this seems like as good a time as any to talk about story and talk about and vibe, right? And
yes.
And whatever versions of that, in whatever properties we're talking about. For you as both a creator and as a person and consumer of capital C content, what are the kind of stories that interest you? Either just for you to read or whatever, but also to write, to explore in games, and all that kind of stuff. Have you noticed similar themes, or are you just kind of all over the place?
Yeah, I mean, if you read my work, you might kind of get an inkling of like what I enjoy, because I think it kind of shows. Yeah. Like I think a lot of my stuff's very like existentialist and kind of mythic in scale to some degree. I love stories that have a lot of space in them. There's a lot of unexplained space. I don't need things to make sense. I like surrealism. I like stories that present challenges for the characters they have to confront. A really basic thing that I think a lot of stories fail to like really engage with. It's kind of interesting. Like, I think good stories are where characters have strong ideals and they have to either challenge or defend those ideals, right? They have to change them, or they have to be tested and then reinforce them and decide that, yeah, this is actually what I believe. Mm-hmm. If none of that goes on, I quickly lose interest in a story. But if a story does that well, then I actually really enjoy it. So I like stories that are very character centric, and I also like stories that, like I said, are very they trust their readers, and they also are interested in setting tone and theme and talking about something that is not just a mechanical A to B to C plot, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So, therefore, I have actually stopped reading a lot of fantasy. I haven't really read fantasy for a long time. I don't actually enjoy fantasy as a genre that much, I guess. Modern fantasy, is that kind of weird to say? There isn't a lot in it that I like, but then again, I haven't looked particularly hard. I find it kind of hews very close, especially a lot of modern fantasy, to like power fantasy, and doesn't really examine itself very much and doesn't seem to be particularly interested in doing so. So I don't know. It's like, not to say that people who enjoy fantasy can't enjoy it. I certainly, I make fantasy. I love playing fantasy video games and stuff, and but I just don't think there's like a lot of interesting stuff in the stories for me to engage with nowadays.
Yeah.
For example, don't particularly like listening to Critical Role. I used to listen to it for a while, but the Matthew Mercer, not a guy, is amazing, but he has a style of game mastering which really irritates me, so I can't stop it, which is he likes to kind of coddle the players a bit. He likes to have a kind of style of game. Some DMs do this, and it's actually totally fine. It's just not my kind of story I want to listen to, where the world often conforms to the characters' beliefs and reinforces them instead of challenging them. Where it'll be about like how the characters believe this thing and they're ultimately proved right, and they don't have to really think about their beliefs too hard. Which is, I mean, it's high order to us for someone running an actual play of a role playing game where anything can happen, right? But it's happened enough in Critical Role in particular that I had to stop listening to it because it wasn't interesting me anymore. Because the stakes didn't feel real. Because I knew that Matt would not really challenge his players in a way that was interesting to me. And maybe actual plays are just not for me. But
it's not for everyone, certainly.
Sure, yeah. But that's kind of my style of story. I like when there are real challenges to characters, and that's the number one thing I think that draws me in. I read a lot of fiction nowadays, a lot of manga, weirdly.
Mm-hmm. What are you reading? Anything stand out?
I love Chainsaw Man. That's my favorite thing. Yet, but yeah, it's incredible. I also really like. I like One Piece a lot. I'm reading that now. Since everyone seems to be doing that, I was like, maybe I should read One Piece. So making my way through One Piece right now.
And good luck for the next several years.
Yes.
as I understand it.
Yeah.
So something that it really struck me as you were talking about that, about how character centric the stories that you enjoy are, which obviously fits well with a lot of tabletop role-playing games, but also seems to play into at least my understanding of how Lancer was designed. And there is a lot of space, not just for the mechanical, like you make your mech your own thing. There's so many different, licenses and gear and whatever that you can really truly make your thing your own.
Yeah.
But also, I know that there are a lot of flexible but robust downtime activities and that sort of thing. So how do you go about, if you did, taking that kind of emphasis and love for kind of character-driven stuff and put that into mechanics and into like a codified rule set for a game you designed?
I guess I like when I don't think Once is like a particularly good example of the kind of stories I like to tell. It's kind of interesting. Like actually, it's funny because the kind of games I like to play are actually more narrative focused rules like games. Like Blades in the Dark is probably my favorite game. And I like it because I like playing like kind of wargaming style stuff, but my preferred style of gaming is much more narrative than Lancer is. So actually I tend to prefer games that do have more character centric stuff in them. I don't think I actually design games that are focused around that much around exploring the characters like ideals and stuff. What I do like is games that offer a lot of power and options to the players, but also offer GMs a lot of ways to challenge them, I guess, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I like to have rules that do hand power and control over to players a lot. There's this weird view of like adversarial relationships between players and GMs.
Definitely.
But I don't like it at all. It's kind of dumb. Like conversely, I don't think GMs and players, I don't think games should be designed where it's like impossible for the GM to like challenge the players somewhat. I think there should be a happy medium between that. So Lancer and Icon too, like offer you a lot of options, and you can feel really overpowered and really fun and impactful with all the things you do. But the GM also has a lot of tools to challenge you because the NPCs are designed specifically to like counter certain character builds or do things like that. I think that kind of shows up. But yeah, generally I don't really write very like narrative centric games, strangely. And they're not the kind of games I like to play. But I like to write them. I like to write kind of crunchy games with lots of character options, I suppose.
Well, you know, I would say that again, even if it's not kind of the narrative, like the mechanics aren't necessarily, like you said, the blades in the dark, the powered by the apocalypse, the I can't the other ones, you know,
Yeah,
other games. I know about tabletop role playing games. But yeah, again, I think something that is, and I talked to a lot of people who run Lancer actual plays about kind of what stood out to them, and that they did still report out that, like, again, there's a lot of room for you as a character to make choices and to influence the world.
That's true.
To, you know, have downtime and express themselves outside of just combat and whatever. So
I like games that just know what they're gonna do and they decide to do it, right? So like I think it's, and I got in trouble for this, but I think I think the system that you use to play a game in is actually very important. I would not play D&D 5e, for example, if I was trying to run a game about mostly social engagements and intrigue and stuff. I just wouldn't do it. It's not a good system for it unless you heavily homebrew it. The game D&D is about killing monsters and getting loot. That's what the game's about. Mm-hmm. You have to kind of modify it if you want it to work differently. And by that point, you're doing work, you know, that you don't have to do. You can play other games that do things better. So Lancer is about fighting in mechs, right? So the out of combat stuff is very light. People have often been like, well, the narrative stuff in Lancer is like really rules light. And I'm like, yeah, because the game really is about getting into a mech and punching somebody. We have downtime stuff because I really like structured games where the game says you're doing this and then you're doing this, because it helps the GM decide, you know, how to run sessions and structure sessions. It also helps the players know what's the goal, right? One of the things that I really rubs me the wrong way a lot of the time playing D&D and listening to lots of D&D games or 5e games right now is that 5e has no such structure at all. And so oftentimes games end up being really aimless because there's actually no incentive to do anything. There's no structure built into the game. The actual structure that's built into the game, the rest system, makes you stop playing the game and sleep in the middle of a dungeon if you want to maximize your powers and stuff, right? So it is important to me that the rules as they're written create the kind of play experience that you're looking for. So in that respect, I do love rules that give power to players. I love rules that give structured games or structures to a game where the GM can like play off of them, and you can expect how an average session of the game will go, that kind of thing. And that's all really important to me. I think it does come out in like the stuff that I do for sure.
And I think the last main question that I kind of had about Lancer, especially structurally, kind of on the back of that, people who run the game regularly, do it on stream, doing actual plays and stuff, talk a lot about how much they enjoy how Lancer is structured, and not just for the reasons that you were talking about of like the session structure and kind of and this is this phase of the game and it's combat now and it's downtime now, but also of the way the book is laid out and the way things are organized and that kind of stuff. So and that for me is always a big barrier for rules, rule systems, right? Is that you have great rules and great mechanics and great everything, but if it's a hard to read book, then it just doesn't hit, right? It doesn't hit my brain, at least. So just could you speak a little bit about kind of your thought process of going in and designing kind of not just the mechanics, but of how the book flows and looks and reads?
Well, a lot of that has to do with our layout artist who did a great job with it, but because the game is codified, where like that's actually color coding. I don't know if you've noticed this in the book, as far as like even like when something is a weapon, it's red or I think black. When something is like a reaction, it's green. That kind of thing. All the different manufacturers have a different color. There's a lot of stuff there that like helps the layout. I think a lot of the heavy lifting though is done by our companion app, CompCon, which is like truly incredible. That's a fan created thing. We have this like amazing character builder, companion app thing that will do all the work for you basically. Yeah. And I think, to be honest, like without the app, I think it'd be a lot harder for people to engage with the game. But the app was again like a fan creation. People who just made it to make running the game easier, and it's like a truly incredible piece of work. So all credit to John or Beef Time, the developer behind that, and his team.
Awesome. So you mentioned that that Lancer was obviously had a lot of public playtesting.
Yeah.
And that being kind of a big part of it. And Icon is obviously publicly available for playtesting right now as well. I think that's available on your website. I think it's version like 1.3 or something like that right now as of recording. And so I was kind of curious, especially because you are someone who had been creating publicly through your comic and had done some game design stuff too. What's the process like for you experientially and kind of like professionally going through public playtests, especially when the public playtest is in a Discord server of 12,000 people or whatever, and or of a wider group of the internet who stumbled across your rules or want to try it out? Like, what was that like for you? And do you have any advice for someone who's doing similar kind of things?
Oh, sure. Generally, it's been super positive. Actually, I've gotten really good reception. I think the strength of the internet is that you can put things out there and it'll just go around, right? Like people spread by word of mouth. People will engage with it. And you don't have to do really any work to promote your stuff if you keep it available and you listen to people's feedback and you continue to improve it. People will find your work and they'll continue to engage with it as long as you keep putting effort into it. So the barrier to entry is very low, which is why you see the flourishing of things like the indie RPG scene on itch.io, for example, because anyone can write a game, put it up, and get some response to it or some feedback or anything. So it's really it's truly a very vibrant scene right now. I've only had a really good experience with it. I've had a lot of public playtesting. The mantra being like, you give people the game early for free, and they just give you playtest feedback, and it's like very, very useful. I mean, Monster was in public playtesting for 2 years, changed drastically, all for the better between the original version and release. I mean, if I'd published the release version of Lancer, I'm not sure it would be playable. Games need to go through that kind of tempering before I think they're in a good state. A lot of people choose to just ignore that step or skip it, and I'm really astounded, including professional publishers, by the way. And the internet's a really great way to do that, to be honest. I haven't had any negative experience with it, really. It's just been very positive. You have people who are very pedantic about the rules and will argue with you over definitions of individual words and stuff, which can be kind of annoying. But like aside from that, it's very, very useful. And my motto is always give people something for free and ask them to pay for it later, especially when it comes to things on the internet. Because I want people playing the game and engaging with the game, right? Lancer is a game you have to play with other people. So as long as you do that, if you give them the game, they'll just go out and play it. So you can play Lancer for free. The player-facing rules are all free on itch.io. You can just go download them. The only thing you're missing is the lore section and the GM NPC section. But other than that, you can download CompCon, the app, totally for free. You can go pick up the game right now if you want. Just go download it. massive-press.itch.io, or just search lancerrpg.com. Completely free game, and just go play it. Then later on, if you feel like you want to buy a copy. It's $25. We have a bunch of expansions now. We've even gone to point to all the player-facing content in Lancer, like all the mechs that come in expansion content, are also free. So if we release a new book that's like a campaign guide, like we released No Room for a Wallflower, for example, all of the mech content, the player-facing stuff that came with that campaign, you can just go download for CompCon and just use it without paying a cent to us. So, my main comic, Kill 6 Billion Demons, has been online as a webcomic for $0 online for almost 10 years now. So everyone just keeps up with it week to week. It's got a ton of people just reading it because it's there. There's no barrier to entry. You can just go read the comic. And then, then later on I go, well, I've been doing this for 10 years. If you'd like me to continue giving you free comics, can you just toss me $2 on Patreon? And a ton of people have done that. So there's a lot of virtues in engaging with that model. It becomes less of a relationship that is transactional and more community-based. People are more interested in that. Yeah.
So that was something I was curious about. I've interviewed now a good kind of like spectrum of people who are, kind of in a similar spot as we are in kind of our public content creation journey or whatever, right? Doing it for a good hunk of time, but not all that much time, and not not full-time, certainly, kind of all the way up to people who are more on your end of the spectrum, who have been creating publicly for a long time. Right. And I believe you are doing it full-time, correct? Through, via Massive, via Kill 6 Billion Demons, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So I was kind of curious, and this is just something I'm always interested in. How has your relationship changed, if it has at all, around kind of being a public, air quotes, content creator over the years, especially as you're getting more eyeballs on your stuff, but also branching out into different game designs and into publishing and into all these other things? What has that experience been like for you, and kind of how has it evolved, if at all?
So there's an interesting thing that happens, right? So initially it was very positive. And when you are someone who is growing an audience, it's very fun because you get more community and more people like engaging with your work. And it's very, very good motivator, right? When I first started the comic, I decided to just put it online because I wanted to finish work and put it somewhere where people would hold me accountable for it, right? And it was very successful because obviously when I put a page online, people would then message me being like, hey, yo, when's the next page coming out? And that's a really good motivator for putting more work out. Conversely, or I guess in addendum to that, like putting Lancer online and having this community form around it was a huge, like I said, a huge motivator for Miguel and I to be like, whoa, we have to publish this now, right? Without the community, we wouldn't have published it. We wouldn't have thought about it. Recently, Miguel, like I said, he works at Wizards of the Coast now, so he's had like no time at all to work on Lancer content. So we felt really bad about not being able to put more content out. So I've actually turned to the community themselves, and I've like hired people to actually make some more books for that now, which has been super cool. So like, yeah, it's really nice when you have a community that will respond and will motivate you to like continue to like work on stuff. Mm-hmm. As you get bigger, though, this other thing starts happening where people start to regard you as like a brand. I don't know how to explain it.
Absolutely.
Like people forget you're a human and that you don't actually know them. And there's a bit of parasociality that gets in there. And there's also a bit of like, you're some dude with 40,000 Twitter followers. Something that gets said to me occasionally when I have opinions on things, and like it's weird because I'm like, what does that mean? Like I'm allowed to have opinions, right? But like people treat you differently. Like they suddenly start to like kind of regard you as like someone who has is engaging differently because they're creating at a certain scale. They start to think about you as like a product instead of a person. Which is very strange. Like Massive ran into this issue because we're a 2-person company, but Lancer was very, very successful. Yeah. And a lot of people would email us and be like, why hasn't my book arrived? And I'd be like, dude, we're not Amazon. We're shipping through US media mail. It takes 2 weeks. I'm sorry. Yeah. So that it's largely been a very positive experience, but you're also kind of exposed to like the raw sewage that is the internet. And so, that can be pretty negative. And yeah, like reaching a certain size of content creator, quote unquote, you start to run into like different expectations of the kind of person you are. It's like really interesting, despite the fact that literally nothing has changed. Everyone just starts to view you differently, and that can be very abrasive, I guess, to some degree.
Yeah, the power of a platform, perceived or otherwise, not to have too much alliteration in one sentence. Yeah, that's always been something that's been really interesting to me. As we're trying to grow, but be good stewards of kind of like our little voice. And like, are we a brand? Are we a people? Are we whatever? And especially for you, I'd imagine, where you as an individual are the quote unquote brand,
Right.
I can see where that would get even more complicated.
Yes. That's the other thing that gets weird because, I mean, people come from me, like my work, right? And it's for me, the person, but then also I'm kind of a brand too, right? Yeah. I am like a creator, quote unquote, as well as a person, and that has certain. You can't just like I'll use a couple examples. You start to get a level of engagement that becomes abrasive, whether people intend it to or not.
Yeah.
Whenever someone makes some dumb meme about my comic, it's funny the first or second time that people post it to me or talk to me about it. The 40th or 50th time, it stops being funny.
Yeah.
Every time I would post an update and people would joke about something in my comic that was kind of funny and memey, I would get like 40, 50 responses from people saying the same thing because they were trying to be wise guys, and a cool, Twitter commenter or whatever, or on my site or whatever.
Yeah, that's stuff.
And it got so bad, I was like, I want to close the comments to my site because people can't stop like making. And it's funny to you because you have one point of engagement with me.
Yeah.
I have like all the engagement of all 40,000 people like following my stuff.
Yeah.
And that's very different from the other side, regardless of how well-meaning it was. The other thing is like you can no longer say things that are like vague or like
no, yeah.
Because like I've a couple times now I've gotten in trouble with TTRPG Twitter because I've made some posts about TTRPGs, vaguely opinionated posts about it. Like I'll say something like I think I said something like the system you use to play a game actually matters a lot. That was literally the tweet, by the way. And this touched on some discourse I had no idea existed. And a bunch of people fucking came into my mentions and got super mad at me for something for some like other conversation I had no idea was even a thing. Or I said something like the other day, like a lot of TTRPGs, the vibes, like the style, the juice of a game is more important than the mechanics. For example, like there's a game called Morkburg.
Yep.
Or Morkburg, I forgot. It's a great game. I fucking love it because it is 99% vibes. The actual system in Morkburg is like, it's like nothing. It's like an OSR game. It's very, very, very simple. The mechanics are non-existent, but the vibes are immaculate. The vibes are incredible. And so it functions off of vibes, which is a form of game design. But people read that as me shit talking the game and got really mad at me, despite the fact that that's not what I intended at all. And so like people will start reading everything into what you're saying at a certain scale. It's like why I think a lot of like like YouTube people will sometimes post a video essay being like, I got cancelled for saying that Aladdin was good or something. Like people just want to read the worst out of everything you say because you're someone with a bunch of social media followers and stuff. That can be really annoying.
Yeah, I can imagine. And especially the old phenomenon of the negative voices being the loudest.
Yeah.
That sort of thing too. Either literally or just mentally. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So as we kind of wind down, I was curious, do you have, I know you're very busy doing a lot of things, professionally and personally. Do you have time in your life right now to play tabletop role-playing games or anything like that?
Oh yeah, I'm in a weekly Blades in the Dark game, and I'm actually going to start running D&D again very soon.
Awesome!
My son was born late last year, and that kind of put a damper on my gaming plans. Yeah, but right now he has a bedtime, and that's an amazing thing. So we can do things again.
Congratulations on the bedtime.
Thank you. You have any kids?
No, I don't. I have a dog.
Nice.
Who sleeps all the time. So
let me tell you, if you ever have kids, bedtime is the most amazing thing in the universe. It's great. I
can imagine. So do you identify more as like a game runner or as a player or both depending?
I think I identify as a game designer most of all, which makes me really crotchety because I'll play games with people and I'll be like, this mechanic sucks. And they'll be like, Tom, just play the game. I'm like, damn it. I don't know. I don't think there's really a difference. I think everyone who is involved in the game is a player. Some people just have more narrative agency, and that's your GM, right? I think a GM is still a player. That's my opinion about that.
Mm-hmm. The last kind of main question that I had before we get into the very intensive lightning round, exactly, is, and this can be either created, it's kind of general creators or in the tabletop role playing game kind of sphere specifically. Yeah. But do you have any individuals, any games, any creators that you? I'm trying to avoid the like heroes, kind of like moniker, right? As like problematic as pedestaling a particular individual. But do you have anything that you kind of like look at as like, oh, I learned a lot from this person or thing or product or experience that really shaped you? Yeah,
I mean, in a TTRPG space particularly, I'm a really big fan of John Harper personally. I don't remember what John Harper's pronouns are. I apologize, but they're really like positive person who's just thinking critically about games and how to make games that have particular, like I said earlier, create particular kinds of gameplay experiences, and they do that really well. I haven't enjoyed like every game I've played by John Harper, but I understand when I read the games, I'm like, this is a well-designed game. This is a game that is thinking about specifically the kind of story that it wants to tell and is doing its best to replicate that, which is really cool. They're like almost like genre games. Like, I really, really enjoy that. I think they're great. And I also like Kevin Crawford a lot. He's an OSR designer who's done Stars Without Number and a few other games. And he just like writes a lot. He's kind of like the Brandon Sanderson of TTRPGs, and he kind of knows what he wants to do with his games, which is he's like, I'm going to write an OSR game. It's going to do this and that, and he does things I think basically by himself. So it's very impressive. He's got a big output, and he just writes these like no nonsense games that are very functional and. I really enjoy that a lot. I also think that it was him originally that he put his games out for free, or he put a free version out. And so I thought that was a cool idea, which is why we're putting out Lancer for free as well. So you can thank him for that.
Anyone who has downloaded the free version of Lancer, be sure to reach out to Kevin Crawford. Thank him personally. Excellent. Well, Tom, it is now the most intensive portion of this interview, the lightning round, infamous for the gauntlet that it presents to creators of all shapes and sizes.
Okay.
I tell everybody that there is no wrong answer. It can be one word. It can be a story. It can be, I don't really have a good answer for that. And that will be it.
Great.
I will try my best to restrain myself from asking follow-up questions as much as possible. Obviously, I reserve the right when it's a fucking weird off-the-wall thing you just said, I will ask the question. But generally, if your answer is magenta, I will say, okay, cool. Next question.
Great.
Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready to go.
Excellent. First question. Is your glass half full or half empty?
There is no glass.
What excites you creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Finishing projects.
What does not excite you creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Working on projects.
What is your favorite sound?
The pterodactyl sound my son makes right now. It's very funny.
We did hear a bit of that in the pre-show, and I also appreciated that as well. What sound do you hate?
Anytime a neighbor is playing music through the walls, like that's just the worst.
What is your favorite word?
Powerful, I think, is my favorite word right now.
What is your least favorite word?
Moist is a good one.
Always, absolutely. Yeah. What tabletop role-playing game, D&D, etc., monster or foe, have you never faced or run that you would love to?
Really want to fight, just for fun, one of the old school epic level things from like AD&D 2nd edition. Like when they statted out gods and stuff. I think it'd be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. What is your favorite adventure of all time? And it doesn't necessarily need to be a pre-written tabletop role-playing game one. It can be a movie. It can be whatever, one that you wrote, one that you experienced, anything. But what is your favorite adventure?
I think Red Hand of Doom is cool.
Mm-hmm. What is your favorite tabletop role-playing game character of all time? And it can be an NPC, it can be someone you've played, it can be whatever.
Tabletop role-playing game character. I was running a game of Blades in the Dark recently. We had a character who a friend of mine was playing, who was a complete psychopath. I think someone said he dressed a bit like Anthony Chigurh or whatever from No Country for Old Men. Like kind of had sort of like a hillbilly aesthetic. And for some reason, we discovered that he had an identical twin who was like working in the military, and they were like equally as like idiotic and psychopathic, and it was very funny. I love when characters have like a clone somewhere.
Final question of the lightning round with the most intense, dramatic question possible.
Yep.
What gives you hope?
Having a son is pretty great. That's pretty awesome. And the fact that I'll probably finish Kill 6 Billion Demons in the next few years, and definitely will finish Icon in the next few years.
Yeah. Well, Tom, you have run the Reckless Attack Gauntlet, including the fearsome lightning round.
Oh, sweet.
So that means you have unlocked the ability to give one last promo opportunity. Tell people who you are, where they can find you, how to support you, the usual spiel. Ready?
Yes. Go. Yeah. So once again, I'm Tom Bloom. You can find my comic at kill6billiondemons.com. You can find Lancer at lancerrpg.com, or you can search for Lancer on itch.io. It's usually in the physical games. You can find it in there. You can also find Icon there. It's another like fantasy JRPG inspired RPG that I am writing. You can also find other of my RPG work, some of which is unfinished, but there's a lot on my Patreon, which is patreon.com/kill6billiondemons. You can find me on Twitter at twitter.com/orbitaldropkick. I will post all kinds of stuff on there, including TTRPG opinions that may or may not get me in trouble.
But all this and much more over on twitter.com.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, Tom, thank you so much. It was a real privilege to get to talk to you, and really deeply appreciate all your time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Cheers.